Well, let's get started with today's devotion. And today we're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30. And we're going to move from Jesus focusing on the command not to murder to the command not to commit adultery. So it's basically he's going, in order from the sixth to the seventh of those commands. So with that in mind, let's read those verses for today. I'll just probably read the first one to get us started. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So once again, the rabbis attempted to narrow the scope of the commandment that you shall not commit adultery. And basically, they really wanted to limit it just to that physical act. Now, Jesus, as we see, expands it. And to some degree, the rabbis should have already seen it as expanded because the 10th commandment says, thou shalt not covet. And obviously, when you look lustfully on another man's wife, you are coveting, you are desiring what he had. But they just didn't pay attention to that. They ignored that. They say it didn't really apply to them. In their view and that of their pupils, the seventh commandment, not to commit adultery, was only the actual physical act is there. So they gave it a very narrow definition. And if you give God's commandments a very narrow definition, it's easy for you to think that you've fulfilled them and you can be boastful about how moral you are and how pure you are because you keep it to a very narrow definition. You can say, I've never murdered anybody, but you still hate lots of people and you call them bad names and you defame them in different ways. And you think, oh, I'm a good moral person when you really aren't. And the same thing's true here with the command not to commit adultery. You can say, I've never committed the physical act, but your heart can be full of lust and desire and you embrace it and you encourage it. Well, that's what they said. But Jesus said, no, it's completely different. He intended, and he gave what the real intent of the command was. And the real intent of the command was a broader prohibition of sexual thoughts, not just sexual acts. Just like the prohibition of murder against murder included angry and insulting words and demeaning words. So the prohibition against adultery includes lustful looking and imagination. See, we can commit murder with our words, and also we can commit adultery with our hearts and with our mind. In fact, anyone, Jesus said, who looks at one lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, a couple points need to be made right now before I go too far. And that's, first of all, this. I just got to clear my throat. There is not the slightest suggestion that natural sexual relationships within the commitment of marriage are anything but God-given and beautiful and honorable. This is not a prohibition about sex. In fact, if you read the Song of Solomon, which is in the Bible, it's not some kind of Victorian prudish thing. It's rather an uninhibited delight of lovers, a bride and groom, in each other. Now, the teaching of Jesus here is referring specifically to unlawful sex outside of marriage, whether it's practiced by a married couple or by an unmarried couple. He's not really even forbidding looking at a woman, right? He's just saying, don't look lustfully. And anybody can know the difference between looking at someone and admiring their beauty and saying they look nice and lusting at them. And so that's the point Jesus is saying. Jesus would say that marriage is beautiful, that male and female are beautiful. They were intended to be together in a marriage relationship. And what takes place there is honoring God and delightful. But lusting, acts outside of that relationship, lusting, that's what's being condemned here. So the second point, Jesus is also basically, we should realize, he is making allusion to all forms of immorality. And, somebody wants to say, oh, he's just really talking about sex, adulterous sex, just all about only a man lusting for a woman. And Jesus doesn't say anything about a woman lusting after a man. And he's always saying about a married man lusting after another, a married woman. You're being just like the Pharisees when you do that. This is exactly what Jesus is trying to tell people is wrong. People are trying to narrow it down to a very minimal legalistic understanding. And he's trying to say, no, those commands have much broader implication and much broader teaching. He is emphasizing that any and every sexual practice is immoral unless it takes place in the relationship of marriage. And also any sexual thought is immoral. Sexual lustful thought is immoral outside of marriage. And this is important here because we've got to realize what he's really wanting us to see is there is a connection between our eyes and our heart and our behavior. And so Jesus is focusing on, if you keep looking at it with your eyes and you then keep thinking about it in your mind, you're going to start acting on that in your behavior. And even if it doesn't work its way out into actual behavior, just the general way you conduct yourself, the general sense in which what you value in life and what you think is important is going to shape you and distort you in ways that God does not want that to be the case. The eyes are important because they get to the head, the mind, and the heart, and that works out in life. Now, Job is a great example of how you should do this, because Job was a righteous man, and he learned this. And notice this is what Job says in Job chapter 31, verse 1. He said, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. And he then went on to say this, if my heart had gone after my eyes, if my heart had been enticed to a woman, he would have behaved inappropriately. So basically what he's saying is I recognize the connection between my eyes and my heart and my behavior. So I made a covenant that my eyes would not look lustfully on another woman. And that's what he did. And as a result of that, he was able to control his behavior and do things right. The teachings of Jesus confirm the experience of Job and is still true today. Deeds of shame, deeds of immorality are always preceded by fantasies of immorality, fantasies of shame. So inflaming our imagination by undisciplined eyes, looking at things they shouldn't look at, and then thinking thoughts that shouldn't be thought, are ultimately going to lead to immoral behavior. And you see, our imaginations are great. They are a precious gift of God. None of the world's great artworks, none of the noble achievements of humanity would have come into existence without imagination. Imagination enriches our life, but all of God's gifts need to be used responsibly, and we cannot readily degrade them and abuse them. And that's certainly true of our imagination. I doubt if ever human beings would not fall victims to immorality if first they didn't open up their eyes to focus on and their minds and hearts to dwell upon things they shouldn't do that. So whenever men and women have learned sexual self-control in deeds, they control themselves in deeds, it's always started because they first learned to control the eyes, the fleshly eyes, and the imagination. Well, that brings us to verses 29 and 30. Let me read those for you. It says this, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, this is something that Jesus thinks is really important because he says it more than once, and it'll pop up again later on in Matthew. And so there he kind of adds not just your eye, pluck it out, but he also says, if your foot or your hand causes you to stumble, better cut those off. And here's the thing is eye and foot and hand, it's not limited just to sexual temptation. Again, it's a principle that has wider application. Now, right now, Jesus is obviously applying it very specifically to sexual sins because that's what he talked about before. But notice when he gets down into verse 29, it kind of talks about any part of your body that would cause you to stumble or sin. So here's the point Jesus is making. And he's not really saying that we should physically cut things off. All right. This is kind of a metaphor. This is kind of like a hyperbole, kind of using a physical description to talk about what we should do internally. Now, there are a few Christians who were so zealous to obey Jesus that they weren't very wise and actually have physically mutilated themselves like this. And one of the best known is a Christian scholar in the 3rd century called Origen, who actually, became a eunuch in obedience to this. And because he did that, actually, the Council of Nicaea forbid that kind of practice because they said that's not what it's talking about. But what he's really saying is that metaphorically, you should behave and live as if your eyes were gouged out and your hand was cut off. So you can't do that. So your feet can't take you places where they're not supposed to be. It's not physical mutilation, but it's what's called mortification of the desires of the flesh. And mortification is kind of a fancy theological term and one that used to be taught up about churches more in the past. So it's kind of a churchy term, but it's a good term. And it has a good meaning, and we probably need to revive it. because mortification means to put something to death. And so what's happening here is Jesus is really saying, put to death the eyes that look at things that they shouldn't look at and linger on things they shouldn't linger on. Act as if you don't have those eyes. Act as if those been taken away. In the same way, he's saying, you know what? Those hands that do things they shouldn't do, you should act as if those hands have been cut off so that you don't have the ability to do those kind of things. And those feet that take you to places they shouldn't go, act as if they're gone, act as if they're not even there so that you can't walk to those places. You can't go to those places. Take those away. It's really just a strong way of saying, don't look, don't touch, don't grab with your hands things that your hands should not grab. Don't use your feet to go to places that they should not go. Internally, take those things that would cause you to do that and toss it away rather than giving into temptation. It's don't look at things that way. Don't do things that way. Don't go to places that way. Behave as if those things were cut off. Put those things to dead. Now, probably every generation has specific teachings that they have to deal with, but obviously this teaching about sexuality is something that's a big, big challenge for our culture because we're a culture that worships sex. We're a culture in which pornographic literature, pornographic, you used to say movies and literature, but no, it's the pornographic internet and is a big problem. And pornography should be offensive to Christians because first and foremost, it degrades women and turns them into sexual objects. It is certainly an affront to God because those that look on pornography engage in unnatural sexual stimulation. It's a problem that needs to be placed. Now, there's things that, they're always, well, what's pornography? And the Supreme Court wrestled with that and nobody could come up with a good definition. They're just going to say when they see it, they know what it is. So it's hard to lay down a law because some things are kind of borderline. And I think we also have to realize that there'll be some movies, some books, some things that some Christians can look at and it does not arouse sexual desire, sexual thought in them, while other Christians look at the smallest thing and it arouses them. So I'm not want to put any kind of specific list of things you should do or not do. I'm just going to challenge you to take Jesus' command seriously. You may have a little higher tolerance than I have, or maybe even I have a higher tolerance than you do. So I may be able to watch some things that you would find uncomfortable. So let's not go around and make judgments for each other, although there are some things that I think we can clearly say are wrong. But let's all make sure we examine ourselves and check out what our eyes are taking in and what our hands are doing and where our feet are going and make sure that we are not using the grace as a cover for our sinful thoughts, our sinful looking, our sinful actions, our sinful behaviors. We got to do what scripture says sometimes is we've got to guard ourselves. And what's guarding? What's like putting a sentry out there? Sentries are out there in a military form to kind of say, hey, bad people are coming. We got to get the whole troops mobilized. So we've got to do some things in our life that put sentries out there to protect us from using our eyes and using our hands and using our feet to engage in sinful things. We've got to be able to say no. And in the sense, we may need to spiritually maim ourselves. Again, that's figuratively, not physically, by saying, no, I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to keep my eyes away from that. And some of you maybe need to give up some internet channels that you're watching because you watch stuff you shouldn't, and you know in your heart that it's leading you to lustful thoughts. And I'm not even sure about some of the stuff because even if I don't do it, does my involvement in some degree encourage somebody else to do it? And that's a tough question. And Jesus doesn't deal with that. Paul deals with that later on. I just find it difficult to even support those that produce that stuff and distribute that stuff. Well, anyway, just got to recognize that there's a level of Christian liberty. And so I'm not going to make rules for anybody else and tell them what they shouldn't do, but I am going to challenge everybody to what Jesus says here. And the reason we need to do that is because what Jesus says here in verse 30. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away, for it's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. Again, this is figurative language. He's not talking about really cutting off part of your body, but he is saying there are some things that you should cut out of your life. There's some cultural things that maybe are embraced by our culture in general that you should say, no, I have to give that up. I have to deprive myself of that because I want to remain faithful to Jesus. because I want to make sure that my faithfulness continues. So I do not go to hell, but I do go to heaven. And so what we have to decide simply is whether we're going to live in this world for the pleasures of this world, or if we're going to live this way, denying ourselves some of the pleasures of the world so that we can live with Jesus in the world to come. The alternative really is sin and hell, or denial of self and getting the reward of eternal life. And we have to decide whether we're going to follow the crowd or whether we're going to follow Jesus Christ. You see, Jesus says that our righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. While keeping detailed laws, we're not going to exceed them because they kept the laws. We exceed it by making sure our heart's pure and we follow Jesus with our heart, not just with our body. Let me pray. Father, these are challenging verses. And when we come before you, we really like to hear verses that just reassure us of your love for us, and that there's no condemnation for us because we're in Christ Jesus. And those are true, and we need to remember those and live by those. But at the same hand, we also need to remember that we are called to live a different life. That as we are called to accept forgiveness from you, we're also called to live a different life. A life in which we say no to the desires of the flesh. We say no desires to this world and the patterns of this world. And we say yes to you. As we mortify, as we put to death those sinful desires, we also live a new life. We live in the Spirit of God. And that Spirit of God empowers us to obey you. So, Father, help us not to be confused by the world we live around us, because the world around us is going to tell us many things that are sinful or okay. Many things that displease you are right, and our flesh is going to tell us that those things are okay as well. But help us listen to your Spirit. Help us listen to your word. Help us to encourage one another to live those lives of devotion to you. And those lives of devotion to you will bring peace and satisfaction to us. We won't be troubled by guilt because we know we break your law. We'll be comforted by the knowledge that we are following you. We're doing our best for you. At the same time, Father, help us to know that if we do fall, if we do sin, that you promised that you are faithful and just and will cleanse us of our sins if we confess the sins and if we turn from them. So, Father, help us to do that today. Help us to know that you are quick to forgive, that you desire us, you want us, that you're not desiring to get rid of us, but you want us to be part of your family, and you want our late behavior by what we look at, by what we do, by what we think, by where we go, to reflect the fact that we are your children. We want our deeds to bring you glory. We want our deeds to say good things about us. So it says good things about you. We don't want to live a life no different from the world. And so people will say, why bother being a Christian? Or Christians are just hypocrites. We want to live a life that's different, that attract people to you, that bring people to you. So Father, help us to do that today. In Jesus' name, amen.